Hey guys, welcome to my part 2 of the best JRPG sequels that I have ever played. And today we're going to take a look at those sequels that are indirect, for so to say, to their predecessors. Like they are connected somehow, one way or another, but now it's an entirely different cast of characters, entirely new plot, maybe the same story, but very unrelated, but not entirely unrelated. So in their own way, these are sequels like what some people will call them spiritual sequels. On the first part, we took a look at those games that were directly connected. The same story, the same characters most of the time, some new characters, some new elements, a different plot most of the time, or the same plot, whatever. The first video was games that were directly connected. And today is the total opposite. These are somehow unconnected but related at the same time. It's a mess, it's hard to explain, but once you take a look at this video, you'll understand. So, let's begin. Number 10, Disgaea II, Cursed Memories. Disgaea II was actually the very first Disgaea that I played in my life, and I loved it. Years later I played the first one and it was good, but I still prefer this sequel nowadays. Both games are related only because of the crazy amount of underworlds that exist in its nonsensical canon. These Gaias are kind of dark comedies that cannot be taken that seriously. So this new title happens in a new world in which the main character wants to defeat the Overlord. In an attempt to summon him, his mother makes a mistake and summons the Overlord's daughter instead. So together the two main characters embark on a journey, blah blah blah. Edna, from the first Disgaea, is also one of the main characters and is actually playable. I'm not sure whether I should be saying that the battle system and gameplay were improved in this sequel, but I found the game to be more satisfactory and less unfair than its predecessor. So it might not be as hard as the first Disgaea was, but it is still challenging and awesome. There's also a port for the PSP that includes new features and 3 playable characters from Disgaea 3. Next is Valkyria Chronicles 2. I'll never understand why they released the sequel to one of the best PS3 JRPGs of all time on the PSP. But I'm guessing Sega was looking for a different approach, more like a spin-off for a portable version that could be easier to play. But this was no spin-off, nope. This was a sequel, and one slightly different than its predecessor. This time you play as a bunch of teens attending school to become soldiers for the war, so it kind of plays a little bit like a school simulator. To be honest with you, I didn't like that part, and the story was not as good as the first game. It's supposedly what happened after the first Valkyria, but in another place with new characters and a new conflict. But the gameplay, even though different this time, was excellent. It was repetitive most of the time, since the developers technically recycled the same maps and missions over and over again, but when it comes to battle systems as addicting as Valkyria Chronicles, that was something that didn't bother me at all. Great game, great sequel. Number 8, Mana Khemia II. An underrated hidden gem that many people overlooked, despite the popularity the first Mana Khemia had. And in case you didn't know, this is considered to be the last JRPG to be released in North America for the PlayStation 2. Overall, it's the same idea as the first Mana Khemia. It's a skull simulator, but now with 2 different protagonists and stories to choose from. Of course they are connected, but most of the missions are quite different. That is why I will play this sequel any day than its predecessor. Now, are the stories related somehow? Yes, they are, considering this happens a few years later, after the first game, and it takes place on the same school. However, obviously there are new characters, new conflicts, new plot, etc. So it doesn't really follow the first game's story. With that clarified, let me say it one more time, because I've talked about this game quite a few times before. It's awesome, in my opinion, much better than the first one.
Sweet dreams.
Next are Tamela Co2. Tamela Co2 is a sequel that takes place around 1.5 years after the events of the first one, but in a different tower of the same world called RCL. To be honest with you, I saw very little resemblance between the two games in terms of story. I did see the connections here and there, but nothing crucial to understand this second part. I will call this game a standalone title that could be very well completely unrelated to the first Art on Helico. The question then is it better than the first one? I'm not so sure. I personally found both games to be equally amazing. One stands out slightly more than the other in some things, but that's just it. I can't really decide which one I like the most, so I'm going to recommend them both. Turn-based RPGs with weird stories, cheesy moments here and there, and one aspect that has made them a little infamous that I have already mentioned several times in previous videos: the fan service. But let's not get into that for now and continue on with the list. So next is Star Ocean II, the second story. I wasn't going to include this game because I didn't know that all Star Ocean games were connected, some of them hundreds of years apart, turning them all into standalone titles. It wasn't until one of my subscribers described the chronology to me that I reconsidered this top and decided to include one of the best Star Oceans ever made. Thanks, man. So as you saw, this game takes place 20 years after the first one, and it tells the story of two main characters that you can actually choose from. However, I've done my 2 playthroughs with both of them, and I spotted very few differences in terms of story or missions. So whichever you choose on your first playthrough will be fine. So what's left to say? It's a classic! It's the first Star Ocean we got from Japan since its predecessor for the Super Famicom never did until its port to the PSP. The second story was ported as well to the PSP, now called The Second Evolution. I've yet to play that one, so I can't say anything about it. But I did beat twice this masterpiece, and therefore I strongly recommend it. Number 5, Shadow Hearts. At last we arrive at one of the games that I talk about the most in this channel. But if it's the first of the series, you're probably wondering why it's on the list. The thing is, Shadow Hearts is considered to be a spiritual sequel to a game called Koudelka for the PS1. Shadow Hearts takes place 20 years after it. But story-wise, they have little relationship, even though some parts are crucial to fully understanding it. To avoid any possible spoilers, I'll refrain from making any explanations because in order to connect the dots between the two games, you really need to play them. Now, the question here might be, why wasn't this game called Koudelka II or something like that? The answer is quite big, and it will take an entire video to fully explain it. In fact, I have attempted to do it in previous videos, so you might want to check them out if you want to know more. But the thing is that Koudelka failed as a game, but not without spawning this spiritual sequel that was so successful that they've made 2 more games in the series. Shadow Hearts is first, but it's still a great sequel. Nier Automata. Nier Automata is a spiritual sequel to a game that, in my opinion, is even more amazing, called simply Nier, a spin-off to the Drakengard series. It was called Gestalt for the Xbox 360 and Replicant for the PlayStation 3, but only in Japan. Here it was just Nier. But I'm not here to talk about that game. I'm here to praise its sequel, like pretty much almost every gamer out there who has played it. You know, I'm a guy who has his own opinion on games, and sometimes I disagree with the majorities praising the big ones, but with Nier Automata, I agree with the fact that it's a masterpiece. Now, how is it connected to its predecessor? That, my friends, is extremely complicated to explain. In fact, even if I spoiled the heck out of you, I still wouldn't be able to properly connect the dots. I'll try my best one day, but that'll have to be another video. The only thing that I can say right now is that this game takes place after the original Nier's 4th ending. That will leave you puzzled, I know, but man, I'm just giving you more excuses to play them both. Number 3, Suikoden II. I've said a million times that Suikoden is my favorite RPG franchise of all time. Also, I've said that its chronology is very difficult to explain in detail. Every single Suikoden takes place in a different timeline, but allegedly in the same world. This game is obviously the sequel to the first game, taking place 3 years after it in a different part of the world, in a conflict initially between Highland and Joestone. So in terms of story, I've always felt every single Suikoden title can stand on its own with absolutely no need to play the others first. Of course, if you want to fully understand every single detail and the connection between these marvelous games, you'll have to play them all and do your own research. Needless to say, Suikoden II is a masterpiece, a great game, and it is considered by many one of the best JRPGs ever made. Unfortunately, it's a little infamous because it's also one of the most expensive RPGs for the PlayStation 1. This was due to having a limited print run at first, which prevented more gamers to get their hands on it, like me. Too bad, because it's one of those experiences every JRPG gamer needs to live. Number 2, Valkyrie Profile 2, Silmeria. It was gonna be really hard to explain to you why this game is on the list without any spoilers. So since I don't like doing that, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to be as ambiguous as possible. Some say it's actually a prequel, but no, because it takes place in a different dimension. Everybody knows this. What most people don't know until after they play the game or do some research is what could be a strong spoiler, so I'm not gonna say it. But the fact that I put this game on the list is obviously because I consider it as a sequel more than anything else. A spiritual sequel, for so to say. In any case, it's a great JRPG, my personal favorite for the PS2 and one that has been less and less hated over the years, thankfully, because I remember when it first came out, a lot of people criticized it here in America. I never understood why, since it was the first Valkyrie Profile that I played. About a year later I played the first one and I loved it as well, but I finally managed to see why the strong criticism towards it. The main problem is, as you might expect, with the story. I'm afraid you're gonna have to play it for yourself to understand why. But trust me, do so. Play this game. It's great. It's a great JRPG. Number 1, Chrono Cross. If you've watched most of my videos or know me personally, you knew this was coming. It was inevitable. Chrono Cross is what I consider to be the best spiritual sequel of all time. I am aware that most people call it as one of the worst, but that's because they just can't understand that Chrono Cross is not Chrono Trigger 2. And by the way, I'm using Masato Kato's own words, the creator of these two amazing games. So of course, if you wanted a Chrono Trigger direct sequel, it was obvious this game was going to disappoint you. But if you forget about that and think of it as a spiritual sequel or merely as its own game, then you'll find out that it's a tremendously good JRPG. It's my favorite video game of all time. How is it then related to Chrono Trigger? Well, that's another answer that involves spoilers, I'm afraid. But I can say and confirm what everybody already knows, and that is that this game takes place just like Valkyrie Profile 2 in another dimension. In fact, that's the main topic of this game, 2 dimensions. Another thing to mention is that this game comes from Radical Dreamers, a game originally for the satellite view, but only in Japan. It was a failure, so that's why the creators decided to turn that game into Chrono Cross. That's all I'm gonna say. It's a great game, my favorite RPG, and truly a masterpiece that people need to admit that it's just not Chrono Trigger 2. Okay guys, that's it. And as you saw, before you complain, I didn't include games like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for the Switch or Ni no Kuni 2 because those are new releases, and well, the reason is because I haven't played them. I have played Xenoblade Chronicles for like 1 hour or less. Ni no Kuni, I have never even touched it or seen it. So I'm sorry if I didn't include those games. I'm gonna leave them in the honorable mentions at the end of this part. And if they're great, or if they're bad, or if they're criticized or whatever, I have no clue. What little I played of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it seemed like a pretty decent game. Maybe someday I'll play it and maybe someday I'm gonna be praising it. But as for now, I'm sorry if I didn't include those types of games, those new games, new releases, or I never say this in my videos, but I'm sorry if I didn't include your favorite games. That goes for everybody who's been watching my videos. Remember, this is my personal opinion. These are my personal favorites. So maybe you have your own, and instead of hating on my video, just share them on the comment section below or make your own video. In any case, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time.